The fluorescent glow of the Xylosian palace felt like a constant, low hum in Jax's bones, a monotonous backdrop to his equally monotonous existence. As a human indentured servant, his days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting cycles of the palace's artificial light. He was a cog, a polisher of alien chrome, a server of nutrient paste that tasted vaguely of recycled algae, and a meticulous guardian of hydroponic gardens where strange, luminous flora thrived under the alien sun. Humanity's place in the vast galactic tapestry was often at the fringes, in roles of service or at best as minor trading partners. Jax, like countless others, had accepted this quiet demotion, a consequence of past galactic conflicts and complex interspecies politics that felt light years removed from his daily reality. His current assignment placed him squarely within the orbit of royalty. Princess Lyra, the youngest and most reclusive daughter of the formidable Xylosian emperor. Lyra was known, if she was known at all, for her peculiar fascination with ancient Terran art, a strange hobby that often resulted in Jax being tasked with deciphering faded holographic prints of human paintings or locating obscure texts on Earth's forgotten musical traditions. He performed his duties with an almost robotic efficiency, a silent, unobtrusive presence in her sprawling, opulently decorated chambers. His interactions with her were minimal, typically a nod of acknowledgment when she entered a room, or a polite query about her meal preferences. The princess, in turn, treated him with a detached courtesy, her multifaceted eyes, usually a calm, cool violet, rarely lingering on him for more than a fleeting moment. It was a life devoid of surprises, a comfortable, if unfulfilling, rhythm that Jax had come to expect. One standard cycle as the palace prepared for the midday nutrient delivery. A subtle shift in the atmosphere began to prickle at Jax's senses. He was meticulously wiping down Princess Lyra's personal data slate, a sleek obsidian device that contained the sum of her royal schedule and private studies. From the hallway he caught snippets of hushed, urgent conversations among Xylosian courtiers. Their usually smooth, melodic tones were punctuated by sharp, anxious clicks and whirs, sounds that spoke of brewing trouble. Krath Confederacy ... border skirmishes. Escalated were phrases that floated through the thick, perfumed air of the palace, chilling Jax to the bone. The Krath, a notoriously aggressive, heavily armored species, were not to be trifled with. Their conflicts were legendary for their ferocity and unforgiving nature. A diplomatic crisis with them was not just news. It was a looming shadow. As Jax finished with the data slate, he began to prepare Lyra's evening nutrient paste, mixing the various supplements and flavorings according to her precise, documented preferences. It was a routine he could perform in his sleep. Yet, today, something was different. As he stirred the pale green mixture, he became acutely aware of a presence behind him. He didn't need to turn to know it was Lyra. Usually she would be engrossed in her studies, her large eyes fixed on a projected text or a holographic sculpture. But today he felt her gaze, a distinct pressure on the back of his neck. He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see her customary detached look, perhaps a vague nod of dismissal once he had finished. Instead, he met her eyes directly. They were not cool and distant now. There was an intense, almost analytical curiosity radiating from them, a laser-like focus that seemed to bore into him. her multifaceted eyes, usually shimmering with that cool violet light, held a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the usual curiosity of a noble observing a commoner. It was deeper, more penetrating, as if she were trying to peer beyond his servant's uniform, beyond his human exterior, and into something fundamental within him. It was a gaze that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, not from fear, but from an unfamiliar sense of being truly seen, stripped bare of his role and status. It was unsettling, yet undeniably captivating. He finished mixing the paste, his movements a little less fluid than usual under her unwavering stare. He placed the bowl on her elegant, floating table, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. He turned to leave, his usual silent exit. But then she spoke, her voice typically a soft, melodic hum that always surprised him with its unexpected depth. Coming from such a refined being, was clearer, more direct than he had ever heard it. "Jocks," she began, her tone gentle yet insistent, stopping him dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, his heart thrumming an unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. "Tell me about your home world," she continued, her gaze never leaving his. "What is resilience to a human?" The words hung in the air, heavy with an unspoken weight, shattering the mundane routine of his life and opening a door to something entirely new, something potentially profound and entirely unpredictable. The whispers of the Croft faded into the background, replaced by the echo of her extraordinary question. Jocks stood frozen, the simple bowl of nutrient paste suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in his hands, Princess Lyra's question echoing in the vast, silent chamber. "Tell me about your home world. What is resilience to a human?" No Xyloju, let alone royalty, had ever shown genuine interest in his origins, much less in abstract human concepts. Their interactions were strictly transactional, dictated by his role as a servant. This was entirely new, unsettling, and strangely exhilarating. He swallowed his throat dry and began to speak, hesitantly, at first, of Earth. He spoke of its tumultuous, often brutal history of a species that had faced countless cataclysms, ice ages, plagues, wars, environmental devastation, and somehow, against all odds, had not only survived but thrived. He described the human capacity to adapt, to innovate under pressure, to find solutions where none seemed to exist. He mentioned the great migrations, the building of cities from dust, the invention of flight, the journey to the stars. He spoke of figures from history who had faced overwhelming adversity and, through sheer will and ingenuity, had forged new paths. He talked about the resilience of the human spirit, the stubborn refusal to give up, the way humans would rebuild after destruction, stronger and wiser than before. Lyra listened, utterly captivated, her multifaceted eyes fixed on him with an unwavering intensity. Her usual detached air had vanished, replaced by an almost palpable absorption. She didn't interrupt, but her subtle shifts in posture, the slight tilt of her head, indicated her deep engagement. Over the following cycles, these extraordinary conversations became a quiet, clandestine ritual, while Jax continued his mundane duties, polishing the intricate Xylosian tapestries, calibrating the environmental controls, preparing her meals. Lyra would often summon him, not for a task, but to ask more questions. She delved deeper into human psychology, our seemingly irrational emotional responses that often led to unexpected breakthroughs, our unique blend of creativity and logic, our strategies for survival in hostile environments. She asked about human warfare, not in terms of weapons or tactics, but the underlying human drive, the desperation that could. Birth brilliance. Jacques found himself recounting tales of human ingenuity in battle, of guerrilla warfare, of outsmarting technologically superior foes through sheer cunning and a refusal to adhere to predictable patterns. He spoke of how humans, when pushed to the brink, could often find unconventional solutions, seeing possibilities where others saw only dead ends. He explained the concept of thinking outside the box, a phrase that seemed to genuinely fascinate her. He noticed her subtle analytical mind at work, piecing together the information he provided, her gaze often drifting to a point beyond him, as if she were running complex simulations in her mind. Meanwhile, the diplomatic crisis with the Croth Confederacy worsened with alarming speed. The palace, usually a bastion of serene order, now buzzed with an undercurrent of frantic energy. Jacques overheard more urgent whispers among the courtiers, news of failed negotiations, a tightening Krath blockade around key Xylosian resource worlds, and the Xylosian fleet, renowned for its size but also its rigid adherence to established protocols, being stretched thin across a vast, vulnerable border. The Emperor's advisers, usually calm and composed, now moved with a visible tension, their melodic voices often rising in agitated tones. Jacques saw the concern etched onto the faces of even the most stoic Xylosian guards. He also noticed a profound shift in Lyra's own demeanor. Her quiet curiosity, while still present, had given way to a focused intensity, an almost desperate urgency in her requests for information about human problem-solving. Her questions became more pointed, more strategic, less about abstract concepts and more about practical application. She seemed to be searching for something specific, a missing piece in a puzzle she was trying to solve. One evening, as the palace lights dimmed to their lowest setting, signaling the deep sleep cycle, Jacques was preparing to leave Lyra's chambers. After one of their extended discussions, he had just finished explaining the human historical concept of a blitzkrieg, a rapid, overwhelming attack designed to disorient and paralyze an enemy. Lyra had listened with an almost unnerving stillness. As he turned to depart, she called his name, her voice barely a whisper, yet it held an undeniable command. "Jacques, wait." He turned back, his heart quickening. She moved to a section of her wall, a seemingly solid panel adorned with intricate Xylosian carvings. With a subtle gesture, the panel slid silently inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, bathed in a soft internal light, lay not more ancient Terran art, but a stack of highly classified Xylosian military and strategic data slates. Beside them, holographic projections flickered to life, displaying intricate star charts, fleet movements, and detailed intelligence reports on Krath military capabilities. The sheer volume and sensitivity of the information were staggering. This was data meant only for the highest echelons of the Xylosian command. Her eyes, no longer merely curious but urgent and determined, met his. The violet glow was now tinged with a deep, almost desperate resolve. "Jacques," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, my family, my people. They are making a grave error in their assessment of the Krot H. They underestimate their brutality, their cunning, and they overestimate their own rigid doctrines. We need a different perspective, a human one. The words hung in the air, a silent plea, a profound act of trust, and a terrifying invitation into a world far beyond his humble station. The weight of her request and the implications of the classified data before him settled heavily in the quiet room, promising a future far more perilous and significant than anything Jax had ever imagined. The cold, hard reality of the classified. Data slates hit Jax with a jolt, a wave of fear washing over him, quickly followed by an exhilarating surge of purpose he hadn't known he possessed. He, a mere human servant, was being asked to review the most sensitive Xylosian military intelligence, to dissect the very strategies meant to protect an empire. It was an impossible, terrifying task, yet looking into Lyra's desperate, hopeful eyes, he knew he couldn't refuse. Her trust, so freely given despite his station, ignited something deep within him. He nodded, a silent, solemn agreement to her extraordinary, dangerous request. Over the next few nights, the palace, usually a place of quiet servitude, transformed into a clandestine war room. Jax worked in secret, Lyra often staying awake with him, her presence a silent testament to the gravity of their shared endeavor. He pored over the data, the complex Xylosian tactical maps, the detailed reports on Krath fleet formations, the intricate logistics of supply lines stretching across star systems. His understanding of Xylosian combat doctrine was limited, relying on what Lyra could quickly explain and what he gleaned from the technical readouts. Their military philosophy, he quickly learned, was built on rigid, predictable structures, a reliance on overwhelming force and established protocols. It was efficient, but also, to a human mind, dangerously inflexible. But it was precisely this human intuition, honed by millennia of his species' tumultuous history, by generations of conflict, adaptation, and an drive for survival, that allowed him to see what the Xylosians, with their rigid, predictable strategies, seemed to miss. He saw patterns in the Krot H movements that suggested feints, not direct assaults. He identified critical vulnerabilities in the Xylosian supply lines, long, exposed routes that were ripe for disruption. He noticed unexploited tactical advantages for the Krath in nebula fields and asteroid belts that the Xylosians dismissed as impassable. Most alarmingly, he uncovered a dangerous over-reliance on outdated defense protocols, static shield arrays, and predictable patrol routes that the Krot H, with their known cunning, would surely exploit. The Xylosians, in their adherence to established might, seemed blind to the subtle art of deception, to the power of the unexpected. Jax's mind, accustomed to human history's countless examples of the underdog outsmarting the giant, began to formulate countermeasures that were bold, unconventional, and utterly alien to the Xylosian way of war. He envisioned rapid, surgical strikes to disrupt Krath logistics, not just their front lines. He considered psychological warfare, sowing discord and doubt within the Krot H ranks through disinformation, a concept almost unheard of in Xylosian military thought. He even dared to suggest using the Xylosian fleet's perceived weaknesses as strengths, baiting the Krath into traps where their own aggression would be their downfall. The diplomatic crisis outside the palace walls continued to escalate, mirroring the tension within Lyra's chambers. Reports of Krath incursions intensified, their probes breaching Xylosian territory with alarming frequency. The Emperor's advisors grew increasingly agitated, their voices echoing through the palace corridors, filled with pronouncements of inevitable, devastating confrontation. The Xylosian War Council, comprised of highly traditional strategists, prepared for what seemed like a foregone conclusion, a direct, brutal clash of fleets that would undoubtedly result in heavy Xylosian losses, even if they emerged victorious. They spoke of honor, of holding the line, of sacrificing for the Empire. But Jax, looking at their maps, saw only a slow, agonizing defeat if they continued on their current path. Finally, after days of intense, secret work, Jax presented his findings to Lyra. He laid out his analysis, detailing the critical flaws he had identified and outlining a series of bold, unconventional countermeasures and offensive strategies. He spoke with a quiet confidence he hadn't known he possessed, fueled by the urgency of the situation and Lyra's unwavering belief in him. He explained the logic behind each suggestion, how human history had shown that adaptability and cunning could overcome brute force. Lyra absorbed every word, her expression shifting from apprehension to a glimmer of calculated hope, a spark of something truly revolutionary in her eyes. The weight of her people's fate seemed to settle on her slender shoulders, and Jax could see the immense pressure she was under. She knew she had to act, that her family's traditional approach would lead to disaster. But presenting a human's and a servant's analysis to the esteemed War Council would be an unprecedented, potentially career-ending risk for her. It would challenge centuries of Xylosian military doctrine, expose her to ridicule, and possibly even accusation of treason. The stakes were astronomically high, yet as she looked at the detailed projections Jax had created, the stark reality of the Krath threat became undeniable. The traditional path was a path to ruin. She made her decision. Then a silent, resolute commitment. Her violet eyes, now burning with a fierce determination, met Jax's. "Jax," she stated, her voice firm, cutting through the tension in the room, "I will present your analysis to the War Council. It is the only way, but they will not listen to me alone. They will dismiss it as a young princess's folly, or worse, as an insult to their long-held traditions. They need to hear it from you. You must be there as my advisor." The word hung in the air, a title of profound significance, elevating him from servant to something far greater, far more dangerous. The realization of what she was asking, what they were about to do, sent a shiver down Jax's spine. He, a human servant, was about to stand before the most powerful military minds of the Xylosian Empire, to challenge their very understanding of war, and to stake his life, and perhaps the fate of an empire, on the unique, often underestimated resilience of humanity. The gamble was immense, the outcome uncertain, and the suspense of the approaching confrontation was almost unbearable. The War Council chamber was a spectacle of Xylosian power and rigid tradition, a vast circular room dominated by a massive holographic projection of the disputed star systems. Ornate banners depicting ancient Xylosian victories hung from the high, vaulted ceiling, and the air hummed with the quiet, dignified authority of the Empire's most seasoned military minds. Jocks dressed in a simple, unadorned uniform provided by Lyra stood silently beside her, a stark anomaly in a room filled with decorated generals, their multifaceted eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He felt every gaze, every subtle shift in their posture, every ripple of skepticism that emanated from the ranks of the Xylosian elite. He was a human, a servant, and his presence here was an affront to centuries of established protocol. He kept his expression neutral, his hands clasped behind his back, a silent, unassuming figure. Lyra, however, radiated a newfound confidence, an almost defiant air that belied her usual quiet demeanor. She stepped forward, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the low murmur of the council members. She laid out Jax's analysis, the unconventional strategies, the identified vulnerabilities, the bold, unexpected countermeasures, presenting them with a clarity and conviction that surprised even Jocks. The initial reaction was precisely what they had anticipated, a mixture of bewildered skepticism and outright disdain. A servant's insights from a human? One elder general scoffed, his translator buzzing with contempt, his multifaceted eyes narrowing in disgust. Another, a grizzled fleet commander with a scarred carapace, snorted. We have fought the Krath. For cycles, their patterns are known. This is folly. The room erupted in a low, agitated hum of agreement. Lyra, however, stood firm. Armed with Jax's meticulous research and undeniable logic, she rebutted every challenge, her arguments precise and unyielding. She projected the data Jax had compiled, showing the Krath's subtle shifts in tactics, their increasingly unpredictable movements, and the dangerous over-reliance on the Xylosians' own predictable responses. She articulated the potential for catastrophic failure if they continued their current, rigid path, painting a stark, undeniable picture of the Empire's vulnerability. Slowly, as she spoke, a few of the younger, more open-minded strategists began to listen, their expressions shifting from skepticism to a cautious interest. They were the ones who had seen the stagnation, who had privately questioned the old ways. When technical points were questioned, Lyra turned to Jax. He stepped forward, his voice calm and steady, offering concise, compelling explanations. He highlighted human adaptability, our history of turning disadvantage into opportunity, of finding victory through innovation rather than sheer might. He spoke of the human capacity for pattern recognition, for seeing the forest and the individual. Trees, a holistic view that the Xylosians, with their specialized, compartmentalized thinking, often missed. He presented scenarios, hypothetical Krot-H responses, and how his proposed strategies would counter them. The debate raged for hours, a tense intellectual battle between tradition and innovation. Lyra's persistence, her unwavering belief in the human perspective, combined with the grim reality of the escalating conflict, new reports of Krath incursions flashing across the main display, eventually began to sway a reluctant majority. The weight of the evidence, the undeniable logic of Jax's analysis, began to chip away at the council's rigid beliefs. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a modified version of Jax's plan was approved, albeit with considerable resistance and a clear sense of unease from the older generals. It was a partial victory, a foot in the door, but it was enough. Following cycles were a blur of intense activity. Jax, now working directly with Lyra, and a small, covert team of open-minded Zelosian strategists helped refine the implementation of the new strategies. He wasn't just an advisor. He was an unseen architect, his human insights guiding the deployment of Zelosian forces. He helped design the deceptive maneuvers, the rapid force deployments to unexpected vectors, the subtle disinformation campaigns that began to sow confusion within the Krath ranks. He was constantly analyzing incoming intelligence, adjusting plans, and predicting Krot-H reactions with an uncanny accuracy that astonished even the most experienced Zelosian officers. The Zelosian fleet, under Lyra's direct influence and guided by Jax's unconventional thinking, executed daring maneuvers, utilizing deception and rapid strikes that caught the Krath completely off guard. Their predictable supply lines were disrupted, their forward scouts ambushed, their communication networks infiltrated. The Krath, accustomed to straightforward brute force engagements, found themselves facing an enemy that moved with an unpredictable fluidity, an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. Slowly, undeniably, the tide of the war began to turn. The Zelosian forces, initially on the defensive, began to push back, reclaiming lost territory, inflicting unexpected losses on the Krath dot in the aftermath of the conflict with the Krath. Confederacy pushed back and a fragile, hard-won peace negotiated. Princess Lyra was hailed as a brilliant strategist, a visionary who had saved the Empire from a devastating war. Celebrations echoed through the palace, and her name was sung across Zelosian space. Yet amidst the accolades she always sought out Jax. In a quiet moment in her private chambers, away from the adoring crowds and the fawning courtiers, she looked at him, her violet eyes filled with a deep, profound respect and an overwhelming gratitude. "You saved us, Jax," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just my people, but our very way of life. You showed us a path we could not see. Jax, no longer just a servant, but a crucial, if unseen, contributor to victory, finally understood the true meaning of her initial, curious gaze. It wasn't just curiosity. It was recognition, an acknowledgment of the often unseen strength, the boundless ingenuity, and the indomitable resilience of humanity. He had thought he was just a servant, a forgotten cog in a vast alien machine. But the alien princess, with her discerning eyes and her courageous spirit, had seen a savior, an architect of victory, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And in doing so, she had elevated not just him, but the standing of all humanity in her eyes, and perhaps in the wider galaxy. He knew his life and humanity's place in the cosmos would never be the same. The quiet hum of the palace now felt different, imbued with the echoes of a future redefined.